Two innocent black twin sisters stop for gas in a quiet southern town and never make it out. Within minutes, they're arrested for a crime they didn't commit. The ruthless judge fabricates evidence, denying them any way out. But what he doesn't know? Their father is the most powerful judge in the country, and he's coming for justice. Will he save them before it's too late, or does corruption run too deep? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The silver Toyota Camry cruised down the Alabama highway, its wheels humming against the sun-warmed asphalt. Maya's hands rested comfortably at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, just like their father had taught them. Simone sat in the passenger seat, her feet propped up on the dashboard despite Maya's frequent reminders about airbag safety. Can you imagine Grandma's face when we show up? Simone grinned, turning down the volume of the old R&B song playing through the car speakers. She's going to flip out. Maya smiled, her eyes fixed on the endless stretch of road ahead. I just hope we're not interrupting any plans she might have for her birthday. Oh, please, Simone rolled her eyes playfully. You know Grandma Evelyn. The most exciting thing she does on Friday afternoons is watch her soap operas and drink sweet tea on the porch. The warm afternoon sun filtered through the towering trees lining the highway, creating a dancing pattern of light and shadow across the dashboard. Fields of golden wheat stretched out on either side, swaying gently in the breeze. Speaking of plans, Maya said, how's that college application coming along? Dad's been asking. Simone groaned, slumping further into her seat. I'm working on it. The journalism program at Columbia is super competitive, but I really think I have a shot. What about you? Still set on Harvard Law? You know it. Maya nodded, her expression determined. Following in Dad's footsteps isn't going to be easy, but someone's got to do it. She paused, glancing at her sister. Though maybe not quite as far as Supreme Court Justice? Oh, please, you'll probably end up there too. Simone laughed. Justice Maya Carter has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The GPS chirped suddenly, interrupting their conversation. Simone frowned at the screen, tapping it with her finger. Maya? I think we missed our turn about 5 miles back. Maya's shoulders tensed. What? How did we miss it? Don't worry, Simone said, studying the map. The GPS is suggesting a shortcut through some place called Mayville. It'll save us 20 minutes. Maya's brow furrowed. Mayville? Never heard of it. That's because you never venture off the beaten path, Simone teased. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? The highway gradually narrowed into a 2-lane road, the pavement becoming slightly rougher beneath their tires. The golden fields gave way to dense woods, and the shadows seemed to grow longer despite the afternoon sun. I don't like this, Maya muttered as they passed a weather-beaten welcome sign that read, Welcome to Mayville, founded 1857. The paint was peeling, and someone had spray-painted over part of it. The streets were eerily empty for a Friday afternoon. Old buildings lined the main street, their windows dark and uninviting. Maya's eyes darted to a Confederate flag hanging limply from a front porch, then another on a flagpole in someone's yard. Maybe we should turn around, Maya suggested, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. Simone was unusually quiet, her earlier playfulness subdued. The GPS says we're on the right track. Besides, we need gas anyway. She pointed to the gauge, which was hovering just above empty. As if on cue, the GPS signal started to fluctuate, the blue dot representing their location jumping erratically across the screen. Great, Maya muttered. Just great. They drove past empty storefronts with faded signs and peeling paint. A group of men sitting outside a barbershop stopped their conversation to watch the car pass by. Maya felt their stares following them down the street. Look, Simone pointed ahead. There's a gas station. The Mayville Gas and Goods sign came into view, its neon letters flickering weakly in the afternoon sun. The wooden building looked like it had seen better days, with weathered siding and a rusty metal roof. 3 old men sat in rocking chairs under the station's awning, their conversations falling silent as Maya pulled into the dusty lot. Maya's stomach churned as she put the car in park. The men's eyes were fixed on their vehicle, their expressions unreadable. The whole scene felt wrong. like they'd somehow driven straight into a different era. "It's just a gas station," Simone said, nudging Maya's arm. Her voice carried its usual lightness, but Maya could hear the slight tremor underneath. "Relax." Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The air conditioning hummed softly, creating a bubble of cool air that she wasn't quite ready to leave. Through the windshield, she could see the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and for a moment time seemed to stand still in this strange, unsettling town called Mayville. The silver Toyota's doors creaked open as Maya and Simone stepped out into the shimmering heat. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement, making the air feel thick and heavy. Maya's sneakers crunched against loose gravel as she made her way around the car to the gas pump, while Simone stretched her arms overhead, working out the kinks from their long drive. The wooden rocking chairs on the store's front porch creaked ominously as their occupants leaned forward, their weathered faces fixed on the twins. Maya felt their stares prickling against her skin as she inserted her credit card into the ancient pump. The machine wheezed and clicked, but nothing happened. "Great," Maya muttered, pulling the card out and trying again. Still nothing. "Looks like we'll have to pay inside first." Simone was already heading toward the store's entrance, either oblivious to or choosing to ignore the hostile atmosphere. The screen door's rusty springs squealed in protest as they pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit interior. The fluorescent lights above buzzed intermittently, casting sickly shadows across shelves lined with dusty merchandise. The smell hit them immediately, a mixture of stale bread, gasoline, and something else Maya couldn't quite identify but made her nose wrinkle. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet as they made their way deeper into the store. Behind the counter, an older white man with a grizzled gray beard watched them through narrowed eyes, his weathered hands resting on the counter's surface. "We need to prepay for gas," Maya said, her voice steady despite her discomfort. The clerk, whose name tag read Clyde, didn't respond immediately, his gaze moving slowly between the two sisters. "Pump number?" he finally asked, his voice gravelly and unwelcoming. "3, Maya answered, pulling out her wallet. While Maya handled the transaction, Simone wandered down one of the narrow aisles, her fingers trailing along the shelves. Most of the products were covered in a thin layer of dust, their packaging faded and dated. She picked up a candy bar, her favorite kind, and noticed the expiration date was still good, if barely. The bell above the door chimed and Maya glanced over her shoulder to see a man in a dark hoodie enter the store. Despite the heat outside, he kept his hood up, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He moved quickly through the aisles, his head down, occasionally glancing toward the front windows. Maya felt her heart rate increase. Something about his behavior set off warning bells in her mind. She wanted to catch Simone's eye, to somehow communicate her unease, but her sister was absorbed in reading the back of a bag of chips. The hooded man made his way to the counter, standing a few feet away from Maya. She could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. Clyde looked up from counting out Maya's change, his expression shifting from suspicion to something else. Recognition, perhaps? Everything happened in a blur after that. The man pulled a gun from his hoodie pocket, the metal gleaming dully in the flickering fluorescent light. "Empty the register," he demanded, his voice muffled, but clearly trembling. Maya's change clattered to the counter as she froze in place. Across the store, she heard Simone's sharp intake of breath. The bag of chips fell from her sister's hands, crinkling loudly in the sudden silence. Clyde's face had gone pale, but his movements were surprisingly calm as he opened the register. "Take it easy now," he said, his voice steady as he began pulling out bills. "No need for anyone to get hurt." The robber thrust a wrinkled paper bag across the counter. "Hurry up." His hand shook slightly as he held the gun, causing Maya's heart to pound even harder. She wanted to look at Simone, to make sure her sister was okay, but she didn't dare move. Clyde stuffed the money into the bag with methodical movements. The robber snatched it the moment the last bill was inside, backing away from the counter. His head swiveled between the front windows and the back of the store before he suddenly turned and bolted toward the rear exit. The door banged open and slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the store like a gunshot. Maya finally allowed herself to breathe, her legs feeling weak beneath her. Simone hadn't moved from her spot in the snack aisle, the fallen bag of chips still at her feet. Their eyes met across the store, sharing a moment of shocked disbelief at what had just happened. The moment was shattered by the sudden wail of sirens outside. Red and blue lights began strobing through the front windows, painting the dusty interior in alternating colors. Maya and Simone both turned toward the entrance as the sheriff's car screeched to a halt in the parking lot, kicking up gravel. Before either sister could process what was happening, the front door burst open. 2 deputies rushed in, their guns drawn and pointed forward. "Everyone freeze!" one of them shouted, his voice echoing off the grimy walls. Maya's hands instinctively rose above her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. Across the store, Simone did the same, her face a mask of fear and confusion as the deputies' weapons swept back and forth between them. The heavy glass door slammed against the wall as Sheriff Hank Willis burst into the store, his imposing figure blocking the afternoon light. His cold eyes swept across the scene, taking in every detail with calculated precision. 2 deputies flanked him, their hands hovering near their holsters, ready for trouble. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Willis's weathered face. Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the sheriff's gaze land on her and Simone. Before either of them could speak, Clyde's voice cut through the tense silence. "Them," he said, jabbing a finger in their direction. "They were in here when it happened." "We didn't do anything wrong." Maya stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "The real robber ran out the back door. He was wearing a dark hoodie and—" "Quiet." Sheriff Willis's command was soft but carried enough authority to make Maya's words die in her throat. He moved closer, boots squeaking against the linoleum floor. The smell of tobacco and leather followed him. 2 young girls just happening to be here during a robbery? Mighty convenient, wouldn't you say? "But we're just passing through," Simone protested, her voice rising with panic. "We were getting gas on our way to our grandmother's house. Check our car. Our luggage is right there." Willis ignored her completely, turning instead to his deputies. "Johnson, Martinez, secure them." The deputies moved with practiced efficiency. Deputy Johnson, a tall man with close-cropped hair, grabbed Maya's arms and twisted them behind her back. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists as he clicked them shut. Simone didn't go as quietly. "Get your hands off me," she shouted as Deputy Martinez reached for her. She tried to step away, but the deputy caught her arm and roughly pushed her against a nearby shelf. Bags of chips crashed to the floor as Simone's body hit the metal rack. "Stop resisting," Martinez growled, forcing her hands behind her back. "You're hurting her," Maya cried out, struggling against her own restraints. "Please, she's not resisting. You're being too rough." Sheriff Willis watched the scene with detached interest, then turned to Clyde. "Did you see them with the money?" His tone suggested the answer didn't matter much. Clyde shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, his eyes darting between the twins and the sheriff. Maya could see the internal struggle playing across his face. He knew they were innocent. He'd watched the whole thing happen. But something in the way he looked at Willis told Maya all she needed to know. "They were standing right there," Clyde muttered, not meeting anyone's eyes. His fingers drummed nervously on the counter. "Maybe they grabbed it after that fellow ran out." A satisfied smirk crossed Willis's face. "Sounds like enough for me." He nodded to his deputies. "Get them in the car." "Our father is a judge," Maya called out as Johnson pushed her toward the door. "Supreme Court Judge David Carter. When he finds out about this—" "A judge's daughters?" Willis's eyebrows rose slightly, but his smirk only grew wider. "Well, well. Guess the apple does fall far from the tree sometimes." The heat hit them like a wall as they were marched outside. The afternoon sun glinted off the patrol cars' windshields, nearly blinding Maya. Local onlookers had gathered, watching with obvious curiosity as the twins were led to the nearest police vehicle. Deputy Johnson pushed Maya's head down as he guided her into the back seat. The vinyl was hot against her legs, and the air inside the car was stifling. Moments later, Simone was shoved in beside her, their shoulders pressing together in the cramped space. Through the window, Maya could see their silver Toyota Camry sitting abandoned by the gas pump. Their grandmother's birthday present was still wrapped in the trunk, along with their overnight bags and all their belongings. As the patrol car's engine rumbled to life, Maya felt tears burning in her eyes. "This can't be happening," she whispered, watching their car grow smaller in the distance as the patrol car pulled away from the station. The handcuffs dug into her wrists, and beside her she could feel Simone trembling. The air conditioning barely worked, leaving them to sweat in the suffocating heat of the back seat. Through the metal grate separating them from the front, Maya could see Sheriff Willis's satisfied expression in the rearview mirror as he drove them away from everything familiar and safe. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Maya and Simone were roughly marched through the Mayville police station's narrow hallway. Their footsteps echoed against the worn linoleum floors, mixing with the distant sound of ringing phones and murmured conversations. The metal handcuffs bit into their wrists, a constant reminder of their helpless situation. Maya tried to stay calm, her legal knowledge from years of studying her father's cases running through her mind. "We have the right to make a phone call," she declared, her voice steadier than she felt. Sheriff Willis's grip on her arm tightened. "You'll get your call when I say you do." His breath smelled of coffee and cigarettes as he leaned closer. "Welcome to Mayville, girls. Things work a little different here." Officers seated at their desks barely looked up as the twins were paraded past, their faces carefully blank. An ancient ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing little to dispel the stuffy air. The walls, painted an institutional green decades ago, were now peeling and water-stained. "This is illegal," Simone protested, struggling against the deputy's grip. "We didn't do anything wrong. The real robber went out the back door." "Shut up," the deputy growled, shoving her forward. They reached a row of cells at the back of the station. The metal bars were spotted with rust, and the concrete floor was stained with age. Sheriff Willis unlocked one of the cells and roughly pushed them inside. Maya stumbled, catching herself against the metal frame of a thin mattress that served as a bed. "You can't do this," Maya said, her legal mind still trying to make sense of the situation. "We have rights. We need to contact our father." Willis's laugh cut her off. "Your daddy can't help you here." He leaned against the bars, a cruel smile playing across his weathered face. "Welcome to Mayville, girls." The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against the floor drew everyone's attention. A tall man with perfectly styled silver hair appeared, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the shabby surroundings. His piercing blue eyes studied Maya and Simone with cold calculation. "Judge Theodore Garrison," Willis announced, straightening his posture. "These are the suspects from the robbery." Maya's heart sank. A judge already? This wasn't normal procedure. Everything about this situation was wrong. Garrison barely glanced at their faces before pulling out a small notepad. "The evidence is clear," he declared, his cultured voice carrying authority. "Witnesses place you at the scene. The stolen cash was recovered nearby." "That's a lie," Simone burst out. "We were victims. We were there when the real robber—" "Silence!" Garrison's voice cracked like a whip. "I find you both guilty of armed robbery. Given the serious nature of the crime, bail is denied." Maya stepped forward, her legal knowledge giving her courage. "You can't do that. This isn't a trial. We haven't had representation, no due process." Garrison's cold smile stopped her words. "Your trial is set for Monday morning," he announced, making a show of checking his watch. "But don't get your hopes up. Mayville has its own way of handling criminals." Sheriff Willis grinned, clearly enjoying their distress. "Better get comfortable, ladies. You're going to be here a while." The cell door slammed shut with a metallic clang that seemed to echo through Maya's bones. The lock clicked with horrible finality. Willis's keys jingled as he returned them to his belt. "Pleasant dreams," Garrison said, already turning away. His expensive shoes clicked against the floor as he departed, Willis following close behind like an eager dog. The overhead lights dimmed, leaving Maya and Simone in near darkness. The only illumination came from a weak security light in the hallway, casting long shadows through the bars. The sisters stood in shocked silence, the reality of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Maya reached for Simone's hand in the darkness, finding comfort in her twin's familiar touch. The cell was cold, and the thin mattress offered little promise of comfort. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, and then there was only silence. Through the small barred window, they could see the sky turning purple with approaching dusk. Just hours ago, they had been excitedly planning their grandmother's surprise visit. Now they were trapped in a nightmare that seemed impossible to escape. The cell door's shadow stretched across the floor like prison bars, a stark reminder of their newfound reality. The darkness seemed to close in around them, bringing with it the weight of their helplessness and fear. The holding cell's single bulb cast harsh shadows across Maya and Simone's faces as they sat on the hard wooden bench. The air felt thick and stale, carrying the musty scent of old concrete and despair. A clock ticked somewhere in the distance, each sound echoing through the empty corridors like a hammer striking metal. Simone couldn't sit still. She paced back and forth across the small cell, her sneakers scuffing against the grimy floor. Her hands were balled into fists, and her usually bright eyes blazed with anger. "This is ridiculous. We can't just sit here while they frame us for something we didn't do." Maya watched her sister move back and forth, her own mind racing but her exterior remaining calm. She'd learned from watching their father that sometimes the quietest person in the room held the most power. "Simone," she said softly, "we need to think this through. We get one phone call. We have to use it wisely." "Wisely?" Simone spun around, her voice cracking. "What's to think about? We call Dad. He's a Supreme Court justice, for heaven's sake. He'll know what to do." Maya nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I was thinking. But we need to be smart about what we say. These people are watching us." The sound of boots clicking against the floor made both girls turn. Officer Craig Bennett appeared at their cell, keys jangling in his trembling hands. He was younger than the sheriff, with kind eyes that didn't quite match his stern expression. "All right, girls," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "One phone call. No funny business." The cell door creaked open, and Bennett gestured for them to follow him. Maya stood first, placing a steadying hand on Simone's arm as they walked. The hallway seemed endless, lined with empty cells and flickering lights that buzzed like angry wasps. They reached an ancient rotary phone mounted on the wall, its black surface scratched and worn from years of use. Bennett stood nearby, shifting his weight from foot to foot. From around the corner, Sheriff Willis watched with narrowed eyes, his thick arms crossed over his chest. Maya picked up the receiver, her fingers hovering over the dial. She'd memorized their father's direct line years ago, never thinking she'd need it like this. The rotary dial clicked slowly as she input each number, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. 2 rings pierced the silence before a deep, familiar voice answered. "David Carter speaking." Maya's hand tightened around the receiver. She could feel Simone pressing close, trying to hear. "Dad," she said, keeping her voice steady, despite the tears threatening to spill. "It's us. We're in trouble." There was a brief pause, then their father's voice sharpened. "Maya? What's wrong? Where are you?" "We're in Mayville, Alabama. The police arrested us for something we didn't do. They're saying we robbed a store, but Dad, we were just getting gas. There was a real robber, but they won't listen to us." Maya spoke quickly but clearly, aware of their audience. "Mayville?" Their father's voice carried a note of recognition. "Who's handling your case?" "Judge Theodore Garrison," Maya replied, watching as the judge himself appeared in the hallway, drawn by the conversation. "They're holding us without bail. The trial's set for Monday morning." The line went quiet for a moment, and Maya could almost see their father's expression, the one he wore when preparing for battle in the courtroom. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Don't say anything else to anyone. I'm leaving Washington now. I'll be there by morning." Judge Garrison's face had lost its smugness, replaced by an ashen pallor as he recognized the name. His fingers tightened around his gavel until his knuckles turned white, and his eyes darkened with something that looked like fear. Sheriff Willis stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor. "Time's up," he growled, reaching for the phone. "We love you, Dad," Maya managed to say before Willis snatched the receiver from her hand and slammed it down. Judge Garrison stood frozen in the hallway, his tall frame rigid with tension. The cruel smile that had seemed permanently etched on his face had vanished, replaced by tight-pressed lips and a furrowed brow. His piercing blue eyes darted between the girls and the phone, understanding dawning on his face as he realized exactly who he'd wrongly imprisoned. Officer Bennett led Maya and Simone back to their cell, his gentle grip a stark contrast to the rough handling they'd received earlier. As the cell door closed behind them, they could hear urgent whispers between the judge and sheriff echoing down the corridor. The private jet's engines whined to a stop as it settled on the small regional airport's runway, its sleek form gleaming under the harsh floodlights. Inside the cabin, Justice David Carter sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly on the briefcase in his lap. But beneath his composed exterior, rage simmered like a pot about to boil over. The cabin door opened with a soft hiss. Carter rose smoothly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the plush carpet. His movements were deliberate, controlled, the careful precision of a man who knew exactly how much power he wielded. At the bottom of the stairs, Marcus Evans stood at attention beside a black Lincoln sedan, its polished surface reflecting the airport lights like mirrors. The driver's face showed nothing but professional courtesy as he held the rear door open. "Good evening, Justice Carter." Linda Shaw hurried down the steps behind Carter, her sensible heels clicking against the metal. Her arms were full of folders and her tablet, the tools of their impromptu investigation. Her face was flushed from the hours of rapid research she'd conducted during the flight. "Everything I could find on Judge Theodore Garrison," Linda said, handing Carter a thick manila folder as he settled into the car's leather backseat. 20 years on the bench in Mayville. Multiple allegations of corruption, racial bias in sentencing, and abuse of power, but nothing ever sticks. Carter's fingers traced the edge of the folder before opening it. The dome light illuminated page after page of complaints, investigations, and suspicious dismissals. His jaw tightened as he read, the muscles working beneath his skin. "The pattern is clear," he said, his deep voice filling the quiet car interior. "Garrison rules Mayville like his personal kingdom. Willis is his enforcer." He paused on a particular page, studying a grainy photograph of the judge accepting an envelope behind a restaurant. "This ends tonight." Marcus guided the Lincoln smoothly onto the dark highway, headlights cutting through the night. Linda sat in the front passenger seat, her fingers flying across her tablet as she continued gathering information. "Sir," she said, turning slightly, "I've found more recent complaints. 3 black teenagers arrested last month for suspicious behavior near Garrison's home. Charges dropped when their parents threatened to contact the ACLU. A Hispanic business owner forced to sell his property after repeated citations and fines." Carter nodded slowly, his expression hardening. "They've been operating this way for years. No one powerful enough to challenge them. Until now." He pulled out his phone, checked the time. 10:55 p.m. Inside the Mayville police station, Sheriff Hank Willis sat at his desk, pretending to review paperwork. His hands shook slightly as he shuffled the same forms back and forth. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, untouched. The phone on his desk rang, making him jump. He stared at it for 2 rings before picking up. Sheriff Willis speaking. A voice like distant thunder came through the line, calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Willis felt his throat go dry. "Justice Carter, sir, The line went dead. The sheriff's chair scraped against the floor as he stood too quickly, nearly knocking over his cold coffee. He hurried down the hallway to Judge Garrison's office, not bothering to knock before entering. Garrison looked up from his desk, irritation flashing across his face. "What is it, Willis?" "He's coming. Carter, 10 minutes. Willis wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "What are we going to do?" Garrison's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around the pen he held until his knuckles went white. "We stick to the story. The girls were caught at the scene of a robbery. We're following proper procedure. But, sir, he's a Supreme Court justice and their father." "He's one man," Garrison snapped, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "This is my town, my courthouse." In their cell, Maya and Simone sat close together on the hard bench, unaware of the approaching storm. Maya had her arm around her sister's shoulders, both of them trying to stay warm in the damp chill of the cell. The Lincoln's headlights swept across the front of the Mayville police station, as it pulled into the parking lot. The streetlights above flickered, as if responding to the charged atmosphere. Justice Carter straightened his tie and picked up his briefcase. Inside his office, Judge Garrison watched through his window as the black sedan came to a stop. His jaw clenched tight enough to make his teeth ache. On his desk, beside a half-empty glass of bourbon, lay the hastily fabricated arrest reports for Maya and Simone Carter. He knew they wouldn't hold up to real scrutiny, but it was too late to change course now. The station's front door opened and Justice David Carter stepped into the fluorescent-lit lobby, his presence filling the space like a gathering storm. Linda Shaw and Marcus Evans flanked him, carrying additional files and documents. Carter's footsteps echoed through the quiet building as he approached the front desk, each step measured and purposeful. The early morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Mayville Police Station, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Justice David Carter's polished shoes clicked purposefully against the tiles as he strode through the entrance, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the room. The usual morning bustle of the station ground to a halt, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. Sheriff Hank Willis stood behind the front desk, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. Despite his attempt at projecting authority, there was unmistakable unease in his eyes as he faced the Supreme Court justice. The other officers in the room seemed to shrink back, creating an unconscious circle of space around the two men. "I want to see my daughters now." Carter's voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades of legal authority. Each word fell like a hammer in the silent room. Willis shifted his weight, trying to maintain his composure. "Now, Your Honor, there are procedures we need to follow." "Now!" Carter didn't raise his voice, but the single word cut through Willis's protest like a knife through butter. The sheriff's face twitched. After a moment of tense silence, he jerked his head toward Officer Bennett, who stood nervously by the holding cell door. "Bring them out." Bennett fumbled with his keys, the metal jingling loudly in the quiet room. The cell door creaked open, and Maya and Simone emerged, looking exhausted but unharmed. When they saw their father, their faces lit up with relief. "Dad!" They rushed forward together and Carter wrapped his arms around both of them, holding them tight. His stern expression softened for a moment as he embraced his daughters. "I'll get you out of here," Carter assured them quietly, his deep voice steady and confident. "Everything's going to be all right." The moment was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps. Judge Theodore Garrison appeared in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly combed and his suit immaculate despite the early hour. A cold smile played across his lips as he surveyed the scene. "I'm afraid that's not how things work in my courtroom, Justice Carter." Garrison's voice dripped with false courtesy. He stepped forward, adjusting his tie with manicured fingers. "These young women are facing serious charges." Carter turned to face him, keeping his daughters close. "What evidence do you have against them?" "Strong evidence," Garrison replied smoothly. "Multiple witnesses placed them at the scene of the crime. The timing matches perfectly, and their behavior was highly suspicious." "I want to see the security footage from the store," Carter demanded, his eyes boring into Garrison's. Sheriff Willis cleared his throat, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Funny thing about that. System had a glitch. Footage was accidentally erased." Maya's hands balled into fists. "That's convenient," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Now, Garrison chided, wagging his finger as if speaking to small children. "Such hostility only makes you look more guilty." Carter stepped forward, placing himself between his daughters and Garrison. The two men stood face to face, decades of legal experience radiating from both of them like opposing forces. "You're making a mistake, Garrison," Carter said quietly. "These charges won't hold up." "In my courtroom, Justice Carter, things tend to hold up exactly as I say they will." Garrison's smile never wavered. "Your daughters will remain in custody until their trial on Monday morning." Simone started to protest, but Maya grabbed her arm, squeezing it in warning. Their father had taught them enough about the law to know when to stay quiet. Carter's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes hardened as he stared at Garrison. "This isn't over," he said, each word precise and measured. The judge's smirk widened as he turned to leave. "Officer Bennett, please escort the young ladies back to their cell. Justice Carter, I trust you can find your way out." Bennett stepped forward hesitantly, looking between Carter and Garrison. Maya and Simone hugged their father one more time before allowing themselves to be led back to the holding cell. Their footsteps echoed in the tense silence. Sheriff Willis stood smugly behind his desk, clearly enjoying the show of power. The other officers avoided making eye contact with anyone, busying themselves with paperwork and phone calls. Justice Carter watched as his daughters disappeared behind the cell door, his face a mask of controlled anger. Judge Garrison's smirk never faltered as he turned and walked away, leaving Carter standing alone in the middle of the station, surrounded by the corrupt system he had spent his life fighting against. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows of room 412 at the Hampton Inn, illuminating Justice David Carter's makeshift command center. Legal documents covered every surface of the standard hotel desk, which had become the nerve center of his daughter's defense. His laptop displayed multiple email threads, and his phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Carter's usually pristine suit jacket hung over a chair, his tie loosened. Rare signs of the strain he was under. His fingers moved swiftly across his phone's keypad as he dialed a number he rarely used for personal matters. "Paul? David Carter here." He kept his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I need your help on this." U.S. Attorney General Paul Whitman's familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "David, I've been following the situation. This is clearly a miscarriage of justice. What do you need?" Carter shuffled through some papers, pulling out a legal brief. "I need federal intervention. These local authorities are running a corrupt operation, and they're holding my daughters hostage in their system." "Send me everything you have," Whitman replied. "I'll put my best people on it immediately." In the corner of the room, Maya and Simone sat on one of the twin beds, their shoulders touching, drawing strength from each other's presence. They'd been released on temporary custody to their father, but the ankle monitors on their legs served as constant reminders of their predicament. Maya watched their father work, admiring his methodical approach despite the personal stakes. Simone fidgeted beside her, unable to contain her nervous energy. "Do you think it'll work?" Simone whispered to her sister. "Getting the federal courts involved?" Maya squeezed her twin's hand. "Dad knows what he's doing. He has to." Carter's legal team occupied the adjoining room, their voices carrying through the thin walls as they worked on multiple strategies simultaneously. The sound of shuffling papers and urgent phone calls created a constant backdrop of activity. Hours ticked by. Carter coordinated with Whitman's office, filing emergency motions and requesting immediate federal oversight. His team prepared arguments citing civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and abuse of power. They built a solid case showing how Judge Garrison's court had a history of discriminatory practices. By early afternoon, the federal prosecutor had filed a motion to move the trial to a higher court. Carter felt a glimmer of hope. This was standard procedure in cases of potential civil rights violations. The local court would have no choice but to comply. But Judge Garrison had other plans. The fax machine in the corner whirred to life, spitting out Garrison's response. Carter read it, his jaw tightening with each line. The judge had not only denied the motion, but had written a scathing rejection that practically dared them to challenge his authority. "He can't do that," one of Carter's junior attorneys protested, reading over his shoulder. "The federal courts have jurisdiction in civil rights cases." "He just did," Carter replied grimly, passing the document to his team for review. Maya stood up, walking to the desk. "What does this mean, Dad?" Carter looked at his daughter, seeing the fear she was trying so hard to hide. She'd wanted to follow in his footsteps, to practice law, but not like this, not as a defendant in a corrupt system. "It means Judge Garrison is forcing us to play by his rules," Carter explained, his voice heavy. "He's claiming there's no evidence of civil rights violations, that this is a simple robbery case under local jurisdiction." Simone joined them, her reporter's instincts kicking in. "But that's not true. The whole arrest was based on nothing but prejudice." "We know that," Carter agreed, "but proving it is another matter, especially when they've conveniently lost the security footage." The phone rang again, Whitman calling back. Carter put it on speaker. "David, we've hit a wall," the Attorney General said. "Garrison's got everything locked down tight. He's claiming full jurisdiction, and without clear evidence of civil rights violations, our hands are tied. We'd need concrete proof of corruption to force federal intervention." Carter's shoulders sagged slightly, a gesture so subtle only his daughters would notice it. "I understand, Paul. Thank you for trying." After hanging up, Carter sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The motion of his hands couldn't hide the deep worry lines etched across his forehead. "They've closed every door," he said quietly, more to himself than to his daughters. Maya and Simone exchanged glances, their earlier hope deflating. Tomorrow they would face trial in Garrison's courtroom, where the verdict had likely been decided before they'd even set foot in Mayville. The legal team in the next room continued their work, but the sounds now seemed hollow, like actors going through motions in a play where the ending was already written. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hotel room floor, marking the passage of precious time they couldn't afford to lose. The Mayville courthouse stood like a weathered sentinel in the morning light, its red brick facade telling stories of countless trials past. Inside, the tension in courtroom A was thick enough to cut with a knife. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, mostly locals who had never seen their small-town justice system challenged by someone of David Carter's stature. Maya and Simone sat at the defense table, their matching blue dresses carefully chosen to project innocence and respectability. Their father stood beside them, his presence both protective and commanding. Despite the exhaustion evident in the slight shadows under his eyes, Justice Carter's bearing remained impeccable, his dark suit crisp, his expression resolute. Judge Theodore Garrison swept into the courtroom, his black robes billowing behind him as he ascended to the bench. His silver hair caught the light from the tall windows, and his practiced smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "All rise," called the bailiff, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The gallery rustled with movement as everyone stood. In the back, reporters from regional newspapers scribbled in their notepads. Word had gotten out that a Supreme Court justice was in Mayville, defending his own daughters against theft charges. It was too juicy a story to ignore. "Be seated," Garrison commanded, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed without question. He shuffled some papers on his desk, taking his time, making a show of his authority. Carter stood straight-backed beside his daughters. Maya's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. Simone's leg bounced nervously under the table until her sister placed a steadying hand on her knee. "The state versus Maya and Simone Carter," Garrison announced, looking down at them over his reading glasses. "Charges of grand theft and conspiracy to commit." A commotion at the back of the courtroom interrupted him. A young man in a suit burst through the doors, clutching a manila envelope. He hurried down the center aisle, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. It was Marcus Thompson, one of Carter's investigators. "Your Honor," Carter spoke up, his deep voice commanding attention. "The defense requests a brief recess to review new evidence that has just come to light." Garrison's face darkened. "Denied. This court will not be interrupted by last-minute theatrics." "Your Honor," Carter persisted, his tone measured but firm, "I believe you'll want to see this evidence." He accepted the envelope from Marcus and approached the bench. "Security footage from Kohl's hardware store directly across from Mayville Gas and Goods. Their cameras capture the parking lot of the gas station." The color drained from Garrison's face, but he maintained his composure. "Approach," he said tersely. Carter handed him the envelope. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he withdrew several still photos, printed from the security footage. Each image was crystal clear, showing a young man in a dark hoodie running from the gas station's back door. In the final photo, the hood had fallen back, revealing the face beneath. "That's Tommy Garrison," someone in the gallery whispered loudly. "The judge's nephew." The whisper sparked a wave of murmurs through the courtroom. Judge Garrison's facade cracked, his lips pressing into a thin white line as he stared at the photos. Maya and Simone exchanged glances, hope blooming in their eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. Simone reached for her sister's hand under the table, squeezing it tight. "Order," Garrison called weakly, but the murmurs only grew louder. Carter pulled out one final piece of paper from his briefcase. "I also have here a sworn statement from an anonymous witness who saw Tommy Garrison dispose of the stolen money behind the Piggly Wiggly on 5th Street. The money has been recovered and is currently in police custody." The courtroom erupted. Reporters sprang to their feet shouting questions. The bailiff pounded his gavel, trying to restore order. Judge Garrison sat frozen on the bench, the photos spread before him like a damning tableau. Maya leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad, how did you—" "Later," Carter murmured, his eyes still fixed on Garrison. The judge's carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. The gallery had dissolved into chaos. Local residents who had known Tommy Garrison all his life were sharing shocked looks and whispered conversations. The reporters were already on their phones, calling in the breaking story. Sheriff Willis, who had been standing near the door, quietly slipped out of the courtroom. Judge Garrison's hands shook as he gathered the photos into a pile. His face had gone from pale to ashen, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. He looked out at the chaos in his courtroom, at the reporters furiously taking notes, at the Supreme Court justice standing tall and unshakable before him, and at the two innocent girls whose lives he had tried to destroy. The evidence lay before him like a death sentence to his career, his reputation, and his family's standing in Mayville. The security footage held up by Justice Carter caught the morning light, the damning images clear for all to see. The security footage played on the large courtroom monitor, its grainy but clear images casting an eerie blue glow across the packed room. Every eye was fixed on the screen as it showed a hooded figure, distinctly not Maya or Simone, bursting through the back door of Mayville Gas and Goods. The timestamp matched perfectly with the robbery. Justice David Carter stood tall beside the evidence table, his presence commanding the room. His deep voice carried effortlessly to every corner as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, this footage clearly shows Brett Garrison, your nephew, fleeing the scene of the crime." He pointed to specific frames where Brett's face was visible beneath the hood. The height, build, and clothing match witness descriptions perfectly. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Several reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, while others typed rapidly on their phones. Maya squeezed Simone's hand under the defense table, both sisters barely daring to breathe as they watched their father work. Judge Garrison's face had turned an interesting shade of red, his knuckles white as they gripped the edge of his bench. He glared down at Carter, but the Supreme Court justice met his gaze steadily, unintimidated. Defense attorney Harold Bennett jumped to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of sitting. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't properly submitted during discovery." His voice carried a hint of desperation as he straightened his crooked tie. "The footage was only obtained this morning," Carter replied smoothly, "and I have all the proper documentation right here." He held up a thick manila folder, including statements from the business owner who provided it, chain of custody forms, and verification from 3 separate video analysts confirming its authenticity. Bennett's face fell slightly, but he pressed on. "This footage could have been tampered with. We have no way to verify Dash." "Are you suggesting," Carter interrupted, his voice carrying just a hint of amusement, "that the independent hardware store across the street from the gas station is part of some elaborate conspiracy?" He turned to address the courtroom at large. "Their security system automatically uploads to a cloud server. The timestamp and metadata are intact. Unless you're proposing that a small-town hardware store somehow orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame Brett Garrison, while simultaneously clearing my daughters." Several people in the gallery actually chuckled. Maya watched as Sheriff Willis shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier smugness completely evaporated. "Furthermore," Carter continued, pulling out another document, "we have the store owner's sworn affidavit stating that Brett Garrison came into his shop the next day to ask if their cameras might have captured anything from the robbery." He paused for effect. "Interesting that he would be so concerned about security footage, isn't it?" The prosecutor, District Attorney Sarah Mitchell, stood up. Her face was ashen as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Maya and Simone Carter immediately. Judge Garrison's jaw worked back and forth as he stared down at the prosecution table. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, he leaned forward, his microphone picking up his slightly labored breathing. This court will take a 1-hour recess to review this new evidence. He raised his gavel high. We will reconvene at 1 p.m. sharp. The gavel came down with a crack that made several people jump. As bailiffs began clearing the courtroom, Maya and Simone hugged their father tightly. "You did it, Dad," Simone whispered, tears in her eyes. "Not yet," Carter replied quietly, watching as Judge Garrison disappeared into his chambers. "But we're close." The crowd filed out slowly, their excited chatter filling the hallway outside. Reporters clustered near the doors, phones out, trying to get statements from anyone who would talk. Through the window, more media vans could be seen pulling into the courthouse parking lot. Sheriff Willis slipped out a side door, already pulling out his phone. Defense attorney Bennett gathered his papers with shaking hands, refusing to meet anyone's eye. The tension in the courtroom remained thick enough to cut with a knife, even as it emptied. Judge Garrison's gavel still sat on his bench, a silent reminder of the power he'd wielded so carelessly. In just 1 hour, everyone would know if justice would finally prevail in Mayville. Maya looked at the clock on the wall. 12 p.m. exactly. The next 60 minutes would feel like an eternity. Judge Garrison's private chambers felt suffocating as he paced behind his mahogany desk, his face flushed with anger. The afternoon sun filtered through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the room's expensive furnishings. Sheriff Willis stood near the door, repeatedly dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, while Harold Bennett perched nervously on the edge of a leather armchair. "We're not losing this case," Garrison snarled, his carefully maintained judicial composure cracking. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a crystal decanter of bourbon on his desk. Sheriff Willis shifted his weight, his police uniform damp with nervous sweat. "They got the tape, Judge." Clear as day, showing Brett running out that back door. His voice cracked. "What if Carter brings in the feds?" Garrison slammed the decanter down, making both men jump. "Then we bury it before he gets the chance." He took a deep breath, straightening his black robes. "Harold, you'll file a motion claiming the footage was obtained without proper chain of custody. Make it complicated. Throw in some technical jargon about digital tampering." Bennett nodded eagerly, pulling out his legal pad. "I can cite State versus Williams, that case about surveillance footage being inadmissible due to improper authentication." "Good." Garrison's lips curved into a cold smile. "I'll sustain the motion, naturally. Can't have evidence that hasn't been properly verified, can we?" He chuckled darkly. Willis wiped his brow again. "But what about Carter? He's a Supreme Court justice, for crying out loud. He won't just let this go." "Carter may be powerful in Washington," Garrison sneered, "but this is my courthouse, my town." He turned to Bennett. "Draft that motion. Make it airtight. I want that footage gone when we reconvene." Meanwhile, in the courthouse hallway, Maya and Simone stood near a water fountain, pretending to get a drink while 2 deputies chatted nearby, unaware of their presence. "Remember that Henderson case last year?" one deputy whispered. "Same thing. Evidence just disappeared. Judge Garrison made sure of it." The other deputy nodded. "And the Wilson trial before that. And the Martinez case. Always the same pattern. Anyone who threatens the judge's position suddenly finds themselves without evidence." Maya's eyes widened as she gripped Simone's arm. Her sister was already pulling out her phone, ready to take notes like the journalist she aspired to be. "Dad needs to know about this," Simone whispered urgently. "This isn't just about us anymore, it's a pattern." Maya nodded, her legal mind already connecting the dots. "It's systematic corruption. The whole system here is rigged." Back in Garrison's office, the judge had settled into his high-backed leather chair, looking more composed. "Willis, I need you to handle the evidence room. Make sure that footage never makes it back into the courtroom." The sheriff's face had gone pale. "Judge, I don't know if..." "If what?" Garrison cut him off sharply. "Having second thoughts about our arrangement? Remember who got you elected, Hank. Remember who keeps the investigations into your department's funding oversights from going anywhere." Willis deflated visibly. "Yes, sir. Bennett finished scribbling on his legal pad. "I'll have the motion ready in 20 minutes, Your Honor. The precedents are solid, on paper at least." "Good." Garrison leaned back in his chair, his confidence returning. "When this trial reconvenes, that evidence will be gone." His smirk returned as he gazed out his window at the town he'd controlled for so long. "And those Carter girls will learn what happens when people try to challenge my authority in Mayville." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Mayville courthouse steps as dozens of news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. The historic building, usually quiet and imposing, now buzzed with activity as reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the courthouse entrance. Jessica Morales stood perfectly poised in her navy blazer, holding her NBC microphone steady as the cameraman gave her the signal. "We're live in 3, 2, 1. This is Jessica Morales reporting live from Mayville, Alabama, where a disturbing case of possible judicial misconduct has captured national attention," she began, her voice clear and professional. "Earlier today, explosive new evidence was introduced in the trial of twin sisters Maya and Simone Carter, 17-year-old honor students who were arrested Friday for a robbery they say they didn't commit. Security footage clearly showing another suspect was presented in court, but in a shocking development, Judge Theodore Garrison has ruled it inadmissible on technical grounds." Behind her, the crowd grew larger by the minute. Local residents mixed with out-of-town supporters, many holding handmade signs reading "Justice for the Carter Sisters" and "Stop Corrupt Courts." The atmosphere crackled with tension and outrage. A CNN reporter nearby did his own live shot. The question on everyone's mind here in Mayville is how Judge Garrison can justify excluding clear evidence of innocence. The fact that the actual suspect appears to be the judge's own nephew has raised serious concerns about judicial impropriety. Inside the courthouse's marble hallway, Justice David Carter stood watching the coverage on a mounted TV screen, his face a mask of controlled anger. His daughters' faces flashed across the screen, their school photos showing bright smiles and hopeful eyes now contrasted with their tearful courthouse appearances. "It's time," he said quietly, straightening his tie and smoothing his suit jacket. His footsteps echoed through the hall as he made his way to the courthouse entrance. The moment Justice Carter pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the reporters surged forward. Camera lights blazed, and microphones thrust toward him like spears. He raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent, recognizing the gravity of the moment. "My name is Justice David Carter," he began, his deep voice carrying across the courthouse steps without need of amplification. "I stand before you, not as a Supreme Court justice, but as a father whose daughters have been wrongfully imprisoned by a corrupt system." The cameras clicked rapidly as he continued, each word measured and deliberate. "Maya and Simone Carter are innocent. We have proof, clear, undeniable video evidence showing the real perpetrator. Yet Judge Theodore Garrison has chosen to suppress this evidence, protecting the actual criminal, his own nephew, while my daughters sit in jail." Jessica Morales pushed forward. "Justice Carter, are you officially alleging judicial misconduct?" Carter looked directly into the nearest camera. "I am doing more than alleging. I am demanding immediate federal oversight of this case. This is not just about my daughters anymore. This is about every person who has faced injustice in this town, every voice that has been silenced by corruption." From his second-floor office window, Judge Garrison watched the scene unfold, his knuckles white as he gripped the windowsill. Sheriff Willis stood behind him, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "He can't do this," Garrison muttered. "He can't just—" "Judge, the whole country's watching now," Willis said, his voice shaky. "Maybe we should—" "Shut up," Garrison snapped, not taking his eyes off the growing crowd below. Outside, the energy in the crowd had transformed from anger to hope. Local residents began stepping forward, sharing their own stories with reporters. Tales of other cases where evidence disappeared, where justice seemed to bend in favor of Garrison's friends and family. An elderly black woman gripped Jessica Morales' arm. "My grandson got 5 years for something he didn't do," she said, tears rolling down her weathered cheeks. "Nobody would listen then, but maybe now." A young black woman in the crowd wiped away tears as she spoke to the CNN reporter. "This has happened for years," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Maybe now, someone will finally listen." The crowd had swelled to fill the courthouse square, their signs waving in the late afternoon breeze. Justice Carter's words had ignited something that had long simmered beneath Mayville's surface. A desperate hunger for justice, for change, for accountability. The national media's presence transformed the story from a local scandal to a nationwide conversation about judicial corruption and racial justice. Satellite trucks continued to arrive, parking wherever they could find space, their crews setting up for evening news broadcasts that would beam Mayville's story into living rooms across America. The morning light filtered through dusty blinds in the makeshift office at the Mayville police station. Justice David Carter sat at a worn desk, his normally pristine suit jacket draped over a nearby chair. His deep voice carried authority even through the phone line. "Director Caldwell, this goes beyond one corrupt judge. We're looking at systematic abuse of power that's affected countless lives." Carter's fingers drummed against a thick manila folder on his desk. "Judge Garrison isn't just corrupt, he's dangerous." Maya and Simone sat at a folding table nearby, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. Their eyes were tired from hours of reading, but determination kept them focused. Maya adjusted her reading glasses, marking another page with a yellow sticky note. "Yes, sir," Carter continued into the phone. "I understand the sensitivity of investigating a sitting judge, but the evidence is mounting." He paused, listening intently. "Thank you, Director. I'll have my team send everything we've found so far." Simone held up a document, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Dad, look at this. 3 cases from last year where defendants were denied bail under suspicious circumstances. All of them involved Judge Garrison's business associates buying their properties at auction." Maya leaned over to examine the paper. "And here's another pattern. Every time someone tried to appeal, the court recordings mysteriously disappeared." Carter nodded at his daughters while still speaking to the FBI director. "We've already identified dozens of cases showing clear patterns of misconduct. My daughters are helping compile the evidence now." He listened for a moment. "Yes, I'll hold for your chief investigator." While on hold, Carter turned to Maya and Simone. "Keep digging. Every piece of evidence matters." Pride flickered in his eyes as he watched them work. Despite their ordeal, they remained focused and determined, using their skills to fight back against injustice. Simone pulled another file from the stack. "These cases go back at least 5 years. Look at this one. A woman lost her farm after being arrested on false charges. The property was sold to a development company owned by—" She checked another document. "Garrison's brother-in-law." Maya started creating a timeline on a large whiteboard. "If we map out all these cases, the pattern becomes clear. Every major property sale in Mayville for the past 5 years has some connection to Garrison or his family." Carter's attention snapped back to the phone as a new voice came on the line. "Agent Phillips, thank you for taking this call. Yes, we have substantial evidence of judicial misconduct, corruption, and possible RICO violations." He reached for a notepad. "I understand. We'll prepare everything for your team." The sisters exchanged glances as they continued their work. Maya's legal mind cataloged each violation, while Simone's journalistic instincts helped her spot connections between cases. Together, they were building an undeniable case against the corrupt judge. "The FBI is sending a team," Carter announced after hanging up. "They'll be here by tomorrow morning." He stood up and walked to the whiteboard, studying Maya's timeline. "This is excellent work, both of you. This visual representation will help the investigators understand the scope of Garrison's corruption." Simone held up another file. "Dad, we found something else. There are at least a dozen cases where people tried to speak up about Garrison. Every single one of them ended up facing criminal charges or losing their businesses. He's been systematically silencing anyone who threatened to expose him," Maya added, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Using his position as a weapon against innocent people." Carter's jaw clenched as he reviewed the evidence they'd gathered. Decades of legal experience told him they were sitting on a powder keg of corruption. The stack of files on the desk represented countless lives damaged or destroyed by Garrison's abuse of power. Keep organizing everything, he instructed, picking up his phone again. The FBI will need clear documentation of every case, every pattern, every connection. He started typing a message to his contacts in Washington. We're going to make sure Garrison can't hurt anyone else. Maya and Simone returned to their task with renewed energy. They understood now that their own case was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of corruption. Their father's presence and guidance helped channel their anger into productive action. The office fell into a rhythm of rustling papers, marker squeaks on the whiteboard, and occasional murmurs as they discovered new connections. Carter moved between making calls, reviewing documents, and coordinating with his team in Washington. The morning light gradually strengthened, illuminating their growing wall of evidence against Judge Theodore Garrison. Carter hung up his phone one final time, his hands tight around a stack of files. It's only a matter of time. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead in the holding cell, casting harsh shadows across Maya and Simone's faces. The sisters sat on thin, worn mattresses that barely cushioned the metal bed frames beneath them. The night had grown long and heavy, weighing on their shoulders like a physical burden. Simone hugged her knees to her chest, her usual spark of defiance finally dimming. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "What if we never get out?" The words hung in the stale air between them, giving voice to the fear they'd both been fighting since their arrest. Maya shifted on her mattress, trying to find words of comfort, but for once her logical mind failed her. The cold reality of their situation pressed in from all sides: the iron bars, the concrete walls, the emptiness of night in a town that seemed built on injustice. She reached across the narrow space between their beds, taking her sister's trembling hand. "We will," Maya said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. The events of the past few days had shaken her faith in the system she'd always believed in, the same system she'd dreamed of serving as a lawyer. Simone wiped her eyes with her free hand, her journalist's instincts still working even through her tears. "Did you see how many empty cells there are? How many people do you think have sat here just like us, knowing they were innocent?" The question hit Maya hard. Since their arrest, she'd noticed things: the resigned looks on people's faces in the courthouse, the way certain families seemed to know the routine all too well, the whispered conversations that went quiet when the sheriff walked by. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, the night guard making his rounds. Both girls tensed, having learned to be wary of authority figures in Mayville. But this guard was different from the others. He was older, with gray hair and tired eyes that held something like regret. He paused at their cell, his keys jingling softly at his belt. Looking at them through the bars, he shook his head slowly. "You two don't belong here," he muttered, just loud enough for them to hear. The simple acknowledgement of their innocence broke something in Maya. Tears she'd been holding back for days finally spilled down her cheeks. "Neither do half the people locked up in this town," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. The guard's eyes darted down the hallway, checking if anyone else was around. His silence spoke volumes about the truth of Maya's words. Without another word, he continued his rounds, leaving the sisters alone with their thoughts. Simone scooted closer to the edge of her bed, still holding Maya's hand. "Remember when we were little?" she asked softly. "How Dad would tell us stories about justice always prevailing in the end?" Maya nodded, thinking of their father's passionate speeches about the law, about right and wrong, about the importance of standing up for truth. Now he was out there somewhere, fighting against a system that seemed determined to crush them. The cell felt smaller at night, the darkness beyond their little circle of fluorescent light somehow more threatening. Every creak of the old building, every distant sound made them jump. This wasn't how their surprise visit to Grandma Evelyn was supposed to go. Their grandmother probably didn't even know they were missing yet. Maya closed her eyes tight, still clutching Simone's hand like a lifeline. "Dad will fix this," she whispered, as much to herself as to her sister. "He has to." Simone squeezed her hand back, and they sat there in silence, two sisters against the world, trying to hold on to hope in a place that seemed designed to crush it. The flickering light above cast shifting shadows on the wall, marking time in an endless night, while somewhere beyond those walls their father worked to set things right. Justice David Carter's temporary office buzzed with intense activity. Stacks of legal documents covered every surface, and his laptop screen glowed with damning evidence of Judge Garrison's corrupt past. The morning sun filtered through thin hotel curtains, casting long shadows across the room as Carter rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept more than a few hours since arriving in Mayville, but determination kept him going. Linda Shaw knocked softly before entering, her face grave as she clutched a fresh stack of papers. "The FBI wants a formal complaint before they'll take action," she said, placing the documents on his desk. "They're being cautious about moving against a sitting judge." Carter's jaw tightened as he straightened in his chair. "Then let's give them one they can't ignore." He pulled the new papers closer, scanning their contents with practiced efficiency. Years of Supreme Court experience had taught him how to find the crucial details that could make or break a case. Meanwhile, in their cold cell at the Mayville jail, Maya and Simone stirred at the harsh sound of metal scraping against metal. Through a narrow slot in their cell door, a tray of unappetizing breakfast slid through, lumpy oatmeal and bread that looked days old. The sisters exchanged a glance but made no move toward the food. "I'm not hungry anyway," Simone mumbled, pulling her knees closer to her chest on the thin mattress. Maya nodded in agreement, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks after days of confinement. Back in the hotel, Carter methodically built his case. He organized evidence chronologically. A pattern of suspicious verdicts, all benefiting either Judge Garrison's friends or family members. Cases where evidence mysteriously disappeared, witnesses suddenly changed their testimony, or charges were dropped without explanation. Each instance alone might have been overlooked, but together they painted a clear picture of corruption. Linda worked alongside him, making copies and organizing files. "There's a clear pattern here," she noted, pointing to a particular case from 3 years ago. Another innocent person railroaded through Garrison's court. The defendant's business was seized and sold to Garrison's brother-in-law for pennies on the dollar. Carter nodded grimly. "Add it to the complaint, we need everything documented." He reached for his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Paul Whitman speaking." "Paul, it's David Carter. We need to talk about Mayville." The U.S. Attorney General's voice carried a note of caution. "David, I've been following the situation. Your daughter's case is concerning, but—" "This is beyond my daughters now," Carter interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "This town is rotten to the core. Garrison has been running it like his personal kingdom for years. I've got documentation of at least 12 cases where he manipulated verdicts to benefit himself or his associates." Whitman's hesitation was palpable through the phone. "If we go after a sitting judge, we need undeniable proof, the kind that would stand up to the strictest scrutiny. You know how these things work, David." "Then I'll get it," Carter replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm sending over my formal complaint now. There's enough here to justify a full federal investigation." Linda worked quickly at her computer, organizing the final documents into a comprehensive file. Cases of wrongful imprisonment, suspicious property transfers, and questionable verdicts, all tied together by Judge Garrison's web of corruption. Carter hit send on the email containing their formal complaint to the FBI. The message contained over 50 pages of documentation, witness statements, and financial records showing questionable transactions linked to Garrison's family members. "It's done," he said, ending his call with Whitman. He sat back in his chair, his expression dark with determination. The weight of not just his daughter's freedom, but the justice of an entire town rested on his shoulders. If the FBI wouldn't act immediately, he would find another way to force their hand. Linda watched him carefully, recognizing the look of a man preparing for battle. "What's our next move?" she asked quietly. Carter's fingers tightened around his phone as he set it down. "If the FBI won't act yet, I'll force their hand." The crystal whiskey glass caught the warm lamplight as Judge Theodore Garrison sat in his leather armchair, his eyes fixed on the flat-screen TV mounted on his study wall. The evening news was running yet another story about the Carter twins case, complete with footage of protesters outside his courthouse. His mansion, usually a sanctuary of power and control, now felt like it was closing in around him. The reporter's voice filled the room. Allegations of corruption continue to surface in the small town of Mayville, where Supreme Court Justice David Carter's teenage daughters remain in custody despite evidence suggesting their innocence. Garrison took another long sip of whiskey, his hand tightening around the glass. The study, with its dark wood panels and walls lined with legal books, had always been his favorite room. Now it felt like a cage. Family photos on his desk seemed to mock him, images of power and respectability that were starting to crumble. The heavy wooden door burst open, making Garrison jump. His nephew Brett stumbled in, face flushed with panic, his usually neat appearance disheveled. "Uncle Ted, they know about me." Brett's voice cracked as he ran his fingers through his messy hair. "The security footage, they can see my face." Garrison slowly placed his glass down on the mahogany side table, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the rage building inside him. "Lower your voice," he commanded, his tone ice cold. "You're acting like a child." "But Uncle Ted—" "I said be quiet!" Garrison stood up, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the room. "You keep your mouth shut. I'm handling this." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Or have you forgotten everything I've done for you over the years?" Brett's shoulders slumped as he collapsed into a nearby chair. "No, sir. I haven't forgotten." The judge's phone buzzed on his desk. Sheriff Willis's name flashed on the screen. Garrison answered, putting it on speaker. He wanted Brett to hear this. "What is it, Hank?" "Judge, we got trouble." Willis's voice was tight with anxiety. "The feds are sniffing around. They've been asking questions at the courthouse, looking through old case files. Some of my deputies are getting nervous, starting to talk." Garrison's face darkened as he paced the room. "Your deputies work for you, Sheriff. Control them." "It ain't that simple anymore." Willis's voice cracked. "This ain't like before. The whole country's watching now. Carter's got connections we can't touch. My men are scared." "Then we make sure there's no case left to investigate." Garrison's voice was deadly calm as he turned to Brett. "You're leaving town. Tonight. Pack light. Use cash only. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even me." Brett's eyes widened. "But what about—" "If they can't find you, they can't subpoena you." Garrison cut him off. "And without your testimony, they've got nothing concrete. Just circumstantial evidence and wild accusations." "Judge," Willis's voice came through the speaker again. "What if they dig deeper? What about the Anderson case, or the Williams property dispute?" "They won't find anything because there won't be anything to find." Garrison's voice was firm. "Clean out any sensitive files. All of them. I don't care how you do it." Brett stood up, swaying slightly. "What about my apartment? My job?" "None of that matters now." Garrison grabbed his nephew's shoulder. "You disappear. Complete radio silence. If anyone asks, you left town weeks ago. Understand?" Brett nodded weakly, his face pale. He turned and hurried out of the study, leaving Garrison alone with the phone call. "Hank," Garrison spoke into the phone, "make sure your men understand. Anyone talks to the feds, they're done in this town. Forever. Their families, too." "Yes, sir." Willis's voice was barely a whisper now. Garrison ended the call and walked back to his chair. He picked up his whiskey glass, studying the amber liquid as the news continued to play in the background. A small smile crossed his face as he settled back into his seat. "They think they can take me down?" He took another sip, savoring the burn. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." The TV droned on, casting shifting shadows across his face as evening settled over Mayville. Outside his window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but Judge Theodore Garrison sat unmoved in his study, plotting his next move while his carefully constructed world began to unravel around him. The morning fog hung low over Mayville as a convoy of black FBI SUVs rolled silently through the empty streets. Their headlights cut through the mist, casting long shadows across the worn brick facade of the police station. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights buzzed as Sheriff Hank Willis poured himself a cup of coffee, his weathered hands trembling slightly. The phone's sharp ring shattered the quiet. Willis nearly spilled his coffee as he grabbed the receiver. "Sheriff speaking." "Sir, we got feds outside." Deputy Thompson's voice cracked with nervousness. At least 6 vehicles, maybe more coming. Willis rushed to the window, his coffee forgotten on his desk. Through the blinds, he watched as the SUVs formed a semicircle around the station's entrance. His throat went dry as men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, their FBI jackets stark against the morning gloom. FBI Director James Caldwell stepped out of the lead vehicle, his presence commanding immediate attention. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, he adjusted his tie before nodding to his agents. They moved with practiced efficiency, spreading out around the building's perimeter. Local officers gathered at windows and doorways, whispering among themselves. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as more FBI agents arrived, some carrying boxes and computer equipment. Willis watched his deputies shift uncomfortably, their usual confidence evaporating under federal scrutiny. Justice David Carter's black Lincoln pulled up across the street. He emerged wearing an impeccable suit, his face set with determination. Reporters who had been camping outside the station for days scrambled to their feet, cameras flashing as Carter made his way toward the entrance. An FBI agent, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, stepped forward with a document in hand. "I'm Special Agent Martinez. We have a warrant to seize all case records under Judge Garrison's jurisdiction." His voice carried across the parking lot, clear and authoritative. Willis felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. "This is a mistake," he stammered, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. His eyes darted between the agents now entering the building and Justice Carter, who stood watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Director Caldwell turned his cold gaze on Willis. "I doubt that," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll need access to your evidence room, record storage, and all computer systems." He gestured to his team who were already unloading equipment. "Your cooperation would be appreciated." Willis watched helplessly as FBI technicians began setting up workstations in the station's main room. They moved with purpose, connecting laptops and setting up portable scanners. The local officers stood aside, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. Justice Carter remained outside with the reporters, his presence a reminder of how quickly things had unraveled. Camera crews from national networks jostled for position, their reporters delivering live updates about the federal investigation into Mayville's justice system. Inside, Willis's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He knew who was calling, Judge Garrison, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. The sheriff's hands shook as he watched FBI agents methodically working their way through file cabinets and computer systems. Years of carefully maintained secrets were about to see the light of day. The morning sun had burned away most of the fog when the courthouse doors swung open across the street. Judge Theodore Garrison emerged, his silver hair catching the light. He paused at the top of the steps, taking in the scene before him. The FBI vehicles, the news crews, the bustling agents. His face showed no fear, only a forced smile that still carried the weight of his power. He straightened his tie and began his descent down the courthouse steps, ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the dusty Venetian blinds in Judge Theodore Garrison's office, casting striped shadows across his mahogany desk. He sat in his high-backed leather chair, methodically reviewing papers as if it were any other Thursday morning. His fingers, adorned with a heavy gold ring, drummed steadily on the polished wood surface. The sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway barely made him glance up. A sharp, authoritative knock rattled his office door. Before Garrison could respond, it swung open with purpose. 2 FBI agents in dark suits stepped inside, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Agent Sarah Martinez, a stern-faced woman with her dark hair pulled back tightly, led the way. Behind her, Agent Thomas Chen's expression remained professionally neutral as he positioned himself near the door. "Theodore Garrison," Agent Martinez announced, her voice clear and unwavering, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, corruption, and perjury." The words hung heavy in the air, like thunder before a storm. Garrison's laugh started low and grew into something bitter and hollow. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, but his right hand trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. The ceramic clinked against the saucer, betraying his unease. Standing slowly, Garrison tugged at his silk tie, adjusting it with practiced precision. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Agent Martinez. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he sneered, drawing himself up to his full height. "I own this town. I've been serving justice here longer than you've been alive." Agent Chen moved forward, handcuffs ready. "Sir, please place your hands behind your back." "This is absurd," Garrison spat, but the tremor in his voice was unmistakable now. "I'll have your badges for this. One phone call, that's all it will take." "Not anymore," Agent Martinez replied calmly, producing a thick manila envelope. "We have documented evidence of judicial misconduct spanning 2 decades. Your phone calls won't help you now." The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the office as Agent Chen secured them around Garrison's wrists. The judge's expensive suit jacket bunched awkwardly at his shoulders, and his face flushed red with rage and humiliation. Outside in the courthouse hallway, a crowd had begun to gather. Clerks, lawyers, and courthouse staff pressed against the walls, watching with wide eyes as their seemingly untouchable judge was led out of his office. Some whispered behind their hands while others stood in shocked silence. Sheriff Hank Willis stood at the far end of the hallway, his face ashen. His hand instinctively reached for his gun belt, but he thought better of it. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched his longtime ally being marched toward the exit. His eyes darted between the FBI agents and the emergency exit, his breathing becoming increasingly rapid. Justice David Carter stood near the courthouse entrance, his tall frame straight and dignified. He watched the proceedings with a measured expression, his years of Supreme Court experience evident in his careful composure. His presence seemed to make Garrison's humiliation complete. As the agents guided him down the marble hallway, Garrison's polished shoes squeaked against the floor. The man who had ruled Mayville's courthouse like his personal kingdom was now just another suspect in custody. His carefully maintained facade of authority crumbled with each step. When they passed Justice Carter, Garrison pulled up short. The FBI agents tightened their grip on his arms, but he managed to turn and lock eyes with Carter. His face twisted into something ugly and defiant. "You think this is over?" Garrison's voice carried through the hushed hallway. "This is just beginning." The agents firmly guided him forward, past the gathered crowd, past the bronze scales of justice mounted on the wall, and toward the waiting FBI vehicles outside. The morning sun caught the metal of his handcuffs, sending bright flashes through the courthouse lobby as Theodore Garrison, former judge and self-proclaimed owner of Mayville, was led away to face justice himself. Throughout the building, phones began to ring as news of the arrest spread through the small town. Courthouse employees who had suffered under Garrison's reign for years stood in doorways, watching history unfold. The portrait of Garrison that had hung in the main hallway for 15 years seemed to stare down at the scene with painted disapproval, a relic of power already beginning to fade. Sheriff Hank Willis paced his cramped office, his boots wearing a path in the thin carpet. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the rattling air conditioner in the window. His hands shook as he loosened his collar, the brass star on his chest suddenly feeling as heavy as a boulder. The morning sun cast harsh shadows through the Venetian blinds, making the room feel like a prison cell. The phone's sharp ring made him jump. He stared at it for 2 rings before picking up, his breath coming in short gasps. "Willis here." "Sheriff." The clipped voice of Raymond Davis, Judge Garrison's high-priced lawyer, sent a chill down his spine. "They got him. Judge isn't talking, but it's only a matter of time. You're next." Willis's mouth went dry. "What do you mean, next?" "Don't play dumb," Davis snapped. "They've got files going back 15 years. False arrests, evidence tampering, selective prosecution. Ring any bells?" The sheriff's legs felt weak. He collapsed into his chair, the ancient springs groaning under his weight. "He promised he'd protect us." "Wake up, Sheriff. Garrison's looking at 20 years minimum. He's not protecting anyone anymore." The line went dead. Willis stared at the receiver before letting it drop onto his desk with a clatter. His eyes drifted to his service weapon, a .357 Magnum that sat in its worn leather holster. With trembling fingers, he drew it out, feeling its familiar weight. The metal caught the morning light as he turned it over in his hands. How many times had he used this gun to intimidate innocent people? How many lives had he ruined following Garrison's orders? The weight of his choices pressed down on him like a physical force. From somewhere down the hall, he heard voices. Firm footsteps approached his office. Willis placed the gun on his desk, his hand lingering on its grip for a moment before pulling away. The footsteps stopped outside his door. 3 sharp knocks. "Sheriff Hank Willis?" He recognized the voice, Agent Thompson from the FBI. He'd seen him earlier, leading Garrison away in handcuffs. Willis straightened his uniform shirt out of habit, though it was soaked with sweat. "Come in," he called, his voice cracking. The door opened. 2 FBI agents in dark suits filled the doorway, their badges gleaming. Agent Thompson's face was stern but not unkind. "Sheriff Hank Willis, you're under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, evidence tampering, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Willis nodded slowly, raising his hands. "I figured this was coming." As Agent Thompson approached with handcuffs, Deputy Mark Collins appeared in the doorway. The young officer's face was a mix of disgust and satisfaction as he watched his former boss being cuffed. "Looks like the king fell," Collins muttered, just loud enough for Willis to hear. "Now the night's next." The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Willis's wrists. He didn't resist as the agents led him from his office, his kingdom for the past 12 years. The walk through the station felt endless. Officers he'd commanded just hours ago turned away or stared with open contempt. They approached the holding cells. Willis knew Maya and Simone Carter were in there, 2 innocent girls whose lives he'd tried to destroy just to please Garrison. His steps faltered. "Keep moving," Agent Thompson said firmly, guiding him forward. As they passed the cells, Willis couldn't help but look. Maya and Simone stood at the bars watching his procession. Their faces showed no joy, no triumph, just quiet understanding. For the first time since this began, Willis met their eyes. His face burned with shame. These girls had seen through him from the start. They'd known he was a coward hiding behind a badge. Now everyone else knew it too. Maya's expression remained steady, but Simone's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Willis quickly looked away, but he could feel their eyes following him down the corridor. The fear he'd used against others for so long had finally come home to roost. As the agents led him toward the waiting car outside, Willis felt the weight of his badge for the last time. Soon it would be logged into evidence, along with his gun and the scraps of power he'd clung to for so long. The morning sun hit his face as they stepped outside, and camera flashes exploded around him. The king had fallen, and now his knight was following, straight into a prison cell where he belonged. In a packed courtroom, Judge Rebecca Sinclair formally dismisses all charges against Maya and Simone Carter, exposing the corruption behind their wrongful arrest. The courtroom erupts in cheers as the twins embrace, their nightmare finally over. Justice David Carter vows to investigate every wrongful conviction linked to Judge Garrison, ensuring this moment sparks real change in Mayville. Stepping out of the courthouse, Maya and Simone are met with applause and reporters. They boldly declare their fight for justice is not just personal, but for all victims of corruption. Their father reaffirms his commitment to righting past wrongs. As they walk away, they leave behind the shadows of their ordeal, standing stronger than ever. Aboard their father's private jet, the weight of their experience lingers. The fear of that jail cell still clings to them, but Justice Carter reassures them that healing takes time. With his steady presence and their unwavering bond, Maya and Simone begin to believe that despite the scars, they are finally free. The black Lincoln sedan rolled to a gentle stop in front of Grandma Evelyn's house, its headlights illuminating the well-tended flower beds that lined the front walkway. The modest one-story home glowed with warmth, yellow light spilling from every window onto the neatly trimmed lawn. On the wide front porch, illuminated by the soft glow of an old brass lamp, stood Grandma Evelyn Carter. Even at 80 years old, she carried herself with dignity and grace. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore her favorite floral dress, the one she always saved for special occasions. Her weathered hands clutched the porch railing as she watched the car doors open, tears already forming in her kind brown eyes. Maya and Simone stepped out into the warm Alabama night, their faces lighting up at the sight of their grandmother. For a moment, they stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, as if a spell had broken, both girls rushed forward, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "Grandma!" they called out in unison, their voices breaking with emotion as they fell into her waiting arms. Grandma Evelyn held them tight, her strong arms wrapping around both girls as they buried their faces in her shoulders. The familiar scent of her lavender perfume enveloped them, and for the first time since their ordeal began, they felt truly safe. Tears flowed freely now, but these were different from the ones shed in that cold cell. These were tears of relief, of homecoming, of love. "My precious girls," Grandma Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled back just enough to look at their faces, her gentle hands wiping away their tears. "My brave, beautiful girls." Justice Carter climbed the porch steps more slowly, watching the reunion with misty eyes. The weight of the past few days seemed to lift slightly from his broad shoulders as he observed his daughters in their grandmother's embrace. "Come inside, all of you," Grandma Evelyn said, keeping an arm around each girl as she guided them through the front door. "I've got dinner keeping warm in the oven." The interior of the house was exactly as Maya and Simone remembered. Comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, family photos covering the walls, and the subtle scent of cinnamon and vanilla that always seemed to linger in the air. The dining room table was already set with Grandma's best china, a gesture that spoke volumes about her faith that her granddaughters would make it home. As they settled around the table, the familiar setting began to work its magic. The tension in Maya's shoulders started to ease, and some of the shadows lifted from Simone's eyes. Grandma Evelyn bustled around, bringing out dishes of comfort food, her famous fried chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, and fresh-baked cornbread. "I knew my girls would come home," Grandma Evelyn said as she took her seat at the head of the table. Her voice carried absolute certainty, as if there had never been any doubt in her mind. Justice Carter, sitting across from his daughters, finally allowed himself a genuine smile. "They fought hard," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Showed more courage than anyone should ever have to." Simone reached for a piece of cornbread, then hesitated, her hand trembling slightly. Maya noticed and squeezed her sister's other hand under the table, a silent reminder that they were safe now, that they were home. Grandma Evelyn noticed too. She reached out and took both their hands in hers, her grip warm and reassuring. The girls looked up at their grandmother, seeing the strength and wisdom in her gentle face. Her eyes held theirs as she spoke words that seemed to reach right into their souls. "Faith is always stronger than fear." The simple truth of those words settled over the table like a warm blanket. Maya and Simone held tight to their grandmother's hands, drawing strength from her unwavering faith and unconditional love. Around them, the house seemed to wrap them in its familiar comfort, beginning to heal the wounds of their ordeal with the balm of family, love, and home. Steam rose from the plates of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread that covered Grandma Evelyn's dining room table. The familiar sense of home cooking filled the air, but the food remained untouched as the family sat in reverent silence. The overhead light cast a warm glow across their faces, highlighting both exhaustion and relief in equal measure. Maya's fingers traced the familiar pattern of her grandmother's tablecloth, her eyes taking in every detail of the room as if seeing it for the first time. "I can't believe we're here," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything they'd been through. Simone sat beside her, shoulders slumped with emotional fatigue. "I thought we'd never leave that place." Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Maya reached for her twin's hand under the table, squeezing it tight. The memory of the cold cell was still too fresh, too raw. Justice Carter leaned forward, his strong hands reaching across the table to cover both of his daughters. His touch was gentle but firm, grounding them in the present moment. "You did," he said, his deep voice steady and reassuring. "And you're stronger than ever." His eyes held a mixture of pride and lingering concern as he looked at his girls. Grandma Evelyn adjusted her reading glasses, studying their faces. "Tell me everything," she said softly, her weathered hands folded in front of her. "I want to know what happened to my babies." Maya and Simone exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Maya began, "We were just trying to surprise you for your birthday." Her voice grew stronger as she described their drive, the missed turn, the fateful decision to stop at that gas station. Simone picked up the thread, describing the eerie feeling of being watched, the Confederate flags that had made their skin crawl. "And then that man came in with the gun," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Everything happened so fast after that." Tears began to fall as they described the arrest, the rough handling by the deputies, the cold cell. Maya's voice shook as she recalled the helplessness she'd felt, watching her sister being shoved against the shelf. They didn't care that we were innocent. They'd already decided we were guilty. Justice Carter's jaw tightened as he listened, his hands clenching into fists before deliberately relaxing them. The rage he'd felt during those moments was still there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "But you fought," Grandma Evelyn interjected, her voice firm despite the tears rolling down her cheeks. "You fought, and you didn't let them break you." She reached across the table, her warm hands covering theirs where they still rested in their father's grip. "You girls are warriors just like your mama was." The mention of their mother brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. Maya nodded, drawing strength from the comparison. "We had to be," she said. "We couldn't let them win." Simone described the moment their father arrived, how his presence had given them hope even when things seemed darkest. "When Dad walked in, it was like we could breathe again," she said, looking at her father with grateful eyes. Justice Carter shook his head slightly. "I should have gotten there sooner," he said, but Maya cut him off. "You came as fast as you could," she insisted, "and you didn't stop fighting until we were free." Grandma Evelyn stood up slowly, her movements deliberate as she walked to the kitchen. She returned with a pitcher of sweet tea, filling each glass with careful precision. "In this family," she said as she worked, "we know about fighting. We know about standing up when others try to push us down." She set the pitcher down and raised her glass. "To freedom," she declared, her voice strong and clear, "and to never letting fear steal it from us again." They all raised their glasses, the simple gesture carrying the weight of everything they'd endured. The sweet tea tasted like victory, like home, like love. As they finally turned to their cooling food, the tension began to ease from their shoulders. They were together, they were safe, they were free. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of Grandma Evelyn's living room, casting delicate patterns across the worn hardwood floor. The morning air was still and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd endured over the past week. Maya and Simone sat together on the plush floral couch, their feet tucked beneath them as they gazed out the window at the quiet neighborhood street. Maya's fingers absently traced the pattern on a throw pillow, her mind still processing everything they'd been through. "I still don't know how we made it," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them. Simone turned to look at her sister, dark circles still visible under her eyes from nights of restless sleep. "We're still here. That's how," she replied, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and determination. She reached over and squeezed Maya's hand, a gesture that had become their lifeline during their time in that cold cell. The floorboards creaked gently as Grandma Evelyn entered the room, carrying a tray with 3 steaming cups of her special chamomile tea. The familiar scent filled the air, bringing with it memories of countless Sunday afternoons spent in this very room. She set the tray down on the coffee table and settled into her favorite armchair, her wise eyes studying her granddaughters' faces. "Here, drink this," she said, passing them each a cup. "It'll help settle your spirits." The twins accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping their hands around the warm mugs. The heat seemed to seep into their bones, thawing something that had frozen inside them during their ordeal. "You know," Grandma Evelyn began, her voice soft but strong, "this is only the beginning, my darlings. Everything that happens now will be a result of what you've endured." She took a slow sip of her tea, letting her words sink in. Maya stared into her cup, watching the steam rise in delicate swirls. "What do you mean, Grandma?" I mean that sometimes life gives us challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But when we do overcome them, we're changed forever, and usually for the better. Simone shifted on the couch, drawing her knees up to her chest. What if things had gone differently? She asked softly, voicing the fear that had been haunting them both. Grandma Evelyn's face softened with understanding. She set her tea down and leaned forward, her eyes full of wisdom earned through years of her own struggles. You wouldn't be the woman you are today, she said gently. Sometimes we have to walk through fire to see the light on the other side. The room fell quiet as her words settled over them. Outside, a bird sang, its cheerful melody floating through the window. Maya found herself thinking about how different she felt from the girl who had excitedly planned this surprise visit just a week ago. I feel stronger, she admitted, surprising herself. Scared still, but stronger. Simone nodded, understanding exactly what her sister meant. It's like, we know what we're capable of now, what we can survive. That's right, Grandma Evelyn smiled warmly. And that knowledge, that strength, no one can ever take that away from you. Maya looked at her sister, then at their grandmother, feeling a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. We didn't just survive, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We grew. Grandma Evelyn reached out and took both their hands in hers, her touch warm and reassuring. The morning sun continued to fill the room with golden light, and for the first time since their ordeal began, both Maya and Simone felt truly at peace, understanding that their experience, though painful, had transformed them into stronger versions of themselves. In a tense courtroom, former Judge Theodore Garrison is sentenced to life in prison for corruption and wrongful convictions. Justice David Carter delivers a powerful statement, condemning Garrison's abuse of power. As the gavel falls, Maya and Simone watch him being led away in chains. This is what justice looks like, Maya murmurs. At Grandma Evelyn's porch, Maya and Simone reflect on their journey over iced tea and cookies. Simone decides to write about their ordeal, while Maya commits to law school. Their pain has found purpose, turning their suffering into a call for justice. Maya begins law school, determined to fight for the innocent. Meanwhile, Simone embarks on an investigative journalism career, exposing judicial corruption. Their shared mission, truth and justice, fuels their determination, setting them on paths to make lasting change. Simone earns a prestigious journalism internship after impressing editors with her passion for exposing injustice. She and Maya celebrate their victories, knowing they are no longer victims, but advocates for change. Years later, Maya argues a landmark civil rights case before the Supreme Court, with Simone documenting it for the press. Their father, now a Supreme Court justice, watches with quiet pride. Once wronged by the system, Maya now stands as a champion for justice. Maya's powerful arguments lead to a historic legal victory, mandating reform in judicial oversight. As Simone captures the moment through her lens, the sisters recognize how far they've come. From frightened teenagers in a jail cell to forces for justice. At a family gathering, Grandma Evelyn toasts to their strength, reminding them that faith is always stronger than fear. Surrounded by love, Maya and Simone embrace their journey, not just as survivors, but as leaders shaping a more just world. Their trials led them here, proving that resilience, truth, and justice will always prevail. If you enjoyed the story of Maya, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. If you enjoyed the story of Maya, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.